Lead the Team Nation, and welcome back to another great episode. Today, I have for you Eduard de Vries Sand, who is the Chief Information Officer over at Axia Women's Health, which is a caring, connected, and progressive community of more than 400 providers and 150 women's health centers across New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky. Their fast-growing community spans OBGYN physicians, breast health centers, high-risk pregnancy centers, laboratories, urogynecology, and fertility centers. Eduard leads on the edge of business and technology, and we're going to dive into that today. He received his MBA from Nyenrode Business University. Hope I got that at least close to being correct. And his Master's of Science from St. Louis University. Eduard, welcome to Lead the Team.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Whoa. All right, here we go. So you like to say, and you're known for saying, that curiosity has a compounding effect for you. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely. So if you think when you learn knowledge, sometimes you don't know where it fits in. But over time, knowledge compounds, just like interest. So at some point, I will be in a meeting sitting with an acquisition target, and we're discussing about a new business model. And I'll be able to relate it back to something I read maybe 1 or 2 years ago, or something I learned from the Wall Street Journal or from a conversation. We can never stop learning. And we never know when knowledge is applicable. And over time, it builds up. You build more and more storage of knowledge, and it will pay off over time. That's what I tell my kids too, keep reading. And at some point, it will actually be useful, believe me. But that's hard when you're a teenager.
Like, sure, Dad, sure, this calculus is going to pay off someday. Yeah, no, I think it's a great mindset too, from just becoming a lifelong learner. Well, like, what's the incentive to learn? Well, it's a compounding effect.
Absolutely. And if you translate that to leadership, if you go in to learn, so if let's say there's an issue you're trying to solve, and instead of saying this is a solution, you ask questions, you try to dig deeper, you often get to the real root cause, and you will learn something, and you'll be able to come up with a better business solution versus I'm just going to apply what I did before. So curiosity is a really critical leadership skill, and it allows people to know that they're truly heard, which is also motivating.
I like that. So from a reading standpoint, you mentioned that specifically. You mentioned the Wall Street Journal, probably some books in there. How do you go about processing it? Do you just sort of read and then it comes to you later what you read, or do you take notes or highlight, or how do you kind of capture what you're reading?
I would say if they're good articles, I'll save them and I can index them, so find them again. I will write down quotes or keywords and group them around topics. So I'll use them at some point for an article. But mostly, I think it is about, for me, it's reading and just remembering it. And it's not about remembering the details, it's remembering the bigger picture. And over time, you continue to fill in more and more of the bigger picture, and you'll never fill it in completely. And it's also, at some point, it becomes relaxing. Because when you read, you can actually slow down and say, I'm going to stop on this page and think through what I've read for 1 or 2 minutes and then continue reading. So you can take the time to really process the information and apply it to something in your head, to a model you're thinking about.
Do you have an app that you use, or what do you do to index ideas that you read?
So I use Evernote, but I think every note-taking tool works. I think at some point you just got to pick something and stick with it. And you can look for the perfect system, but at the end, the perfect system is what you use. And
that's true.
And I think I started using Evernote 10, 15 years ago. And you know what? I will never change. Not because it's the best, but it works for me. And over time, it's amazing how much knowledge you build up. It really becomes, I think, a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I'm definitely an Evernote user too. And like you say, it may not be the perfect one, but it's the best one is the one that you use. And the fact that you can have it on your phone and your computer, no matter where you're reading, and capture something, I think is something to be said for that. Or you can take a picture. If you're in a presentation, you see an idea, you can take a picture and save it to your Evernote and do the tags. And
absolutely. And these days, life is busy. None of us have a 40-hour-a-week job. We all work more. So it also allows us to organize our private life. So, I have a section where it's like the shopping list and, the to-do list at home, which I share with my wife. Then I have my knowledge base, which is personal knowledge. And then I have work notes as well, even though a lot of the work-specific notes I keep on the company systems. But it really works because everybody needs a system to be effective. We can't work without doing that anymore these days.
Yeah, so good. So good. I mean, curiosity has a compounding effect, and it helps to have those big ideas to access later and to remember. And I think it's so valuable. And Evernote's a good system, but yeah, there might be a lot of other ones out there for people. But just to just say as a leader, I need to have a way to capture these ideas so I can share them with my team later and the people around me. And it might be people down the road. Now, when do you use the Wall Street Journal app or you use the actual paper itself? You get it?
So I use both. So I use the paper, but everybody in my management team always laughs. I'm always a week behind because I take the time to read it. So for me, they start adding up on Monday, and like by the time Saturday hits, I'll sit down for 2 hours and really I'll sit in the sunroom and we sit down there, read our newspapers, and the kids run around, and it's a good way. And then during the week, I keep track of the articles in the app. If something more urgent comes along, I want to know what happens in the markets. So it's finding a personal way of making it work for you. And to me, it's really about two different speeds. One of them I want to read the day itself, and one of them it's okay if it's a week later.
Mm-hmm. Good to have an approach to that. And I mean, it's probably not a huge surprise for listeners, but most executives, y'all, are reading the Wall Street Journal. So if you're not reading it, you're missing potentially out on the conversation starter. And I had one leader on who said, Ben, I used to really get concerned about my board meetings. And I'll go meet with the board and I wouldn't know what they're asking. And then someone said to me, just read the Wall Street Journal that day, because they're probably going to ask you something that they read the Wall Street Journal and how it applies to your business. And he's like, yep, that was it. I just read the Wall Street Journal before the board meeting. And there's always going to be a topic out of there that they ask me about.
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I've done a lot of international work, and on flights, you sit next to somebody for 10, 12, 16 hours. You fly to Australia, you'll talk to people. And it was interesting. I once sat next to an oil and gas executive, and we had a really long discussion about where the oil prices were going in the future. And if somebody says, are you in the industry? I'm like, no, I read the newspaper, and I've done it for 20 years by now.
Nice.
And I said before, I read the Wall Street Journal, or read the Dutch version of it, which is called Financieel Dagblad. That's the same idea. It's all about, you never know when you need that information. But later on, when I worked in pharmaceutical, the oil price had a really big impact on our profit margins. And I was able to have a good discussion with my CFO where we thought it was going. Nobody else, including our CEO, really had an opinion on it. So it's interesting how you can really differentiate yourself by having this knowledge, but you never know when you need it.
All right. So while we're down the rabbit hole, let me ask you. I know you're a big book reader. And then you got the paper. So book is more sort of everlasting knowledge as I look at it, at least not all the time, but a lot of time. And then you got the newspapers, more current stuff. What is your sort of perspective on knowledge from books versus current events? And how do you approach sort of measuring your intake and prioritizing it?
I think I less measure it because I don't want it to become a burden. But I'm curious. So I end up buying books, and I'm always, I would say, between 6 and 10 feet of books behind. And because I see a book and it fascinates me, and I like to give books as gifts as well. So people then return the favor and said, hey, have you read this book? You should read it. To me, a book I really read, and I don't know if the knowledge is current. And sometimes you read the book and you're like, well, that was not worth my time. But most of the time, there are some nuggets in there. So it's more, that's really long-term value for me. Well, the newspaper, a lot of it's short-term, except for maybe some of the review part of the Wall Street Journal. A lot of it's knowing what's going on in the markets today. What do you think interest rates are going to do? And you might not think so, but that has a major impact to what prices your suppliers are going to quote you, to the capital of your business. So I think it's more short-term versus long-term. And over time, if you decide that that's one of your competitive advantages, then you should not see it as a chore. You should just enjoy doing it and start to say, this is who I am. This is part of me. And I'm going to sit down. I'm going to relax for an hour with a good book. But the book can be something serious.
What's your favorite book to gift?
Lately, I've been giving a lot of Amp It Up by Frank Slootman. He was the CEO of ServiceNow and is now the CEO of Snowflake. And the big takeaway from his book, he verbalized something I've done for a long time. It's about strategic velocity. So it's really about how, when you really pick up the pace, when you make things faster, it forces you to make choices. You can't do 20 priorities. You can only do 2 or 3, and then try to do them in fairly short cycles. So you really get results after 3, 6, 9 months instead of the old this transformation is going to take 3 years and is never going to be completed.
Ah, okay.
So when you read that book, you will halfway through want to put it down and actually go and work, go and do something. It's he has an exciting way of writing, and it's a really basic philosophy. But I think many of us use elements of it. He's just really good describing it in words.
And what's the name of the book again?
Amp it up. AMP it up.
Amp it up. Okay. So which would make sense. It helps you speed up and prioritize. So the crux is he's got a methodology of prioritizing. And then that's
I would say he does a few things. So number one, he says, get your organization right, align your people. I think then the next one is what you just talked about. It's about sharpen focus. What do you not do? If you think about Michael Porter, he said the essence of strategy is what do you not do? It is so true because you can do 10 things half, or you can do 10, or you can do 2 or 3 things whole. And those 2 or 3 things are really going to move the needle. Then he says, pick up the pace. So really go faster, which forces you to cut all the excess, not focus on anything else. And he says, only after that, transform your strategy. But you've got to be able to execute as a team and as an organization. And once you can do that, then you got to make sure you have the right strategy, you execute the right things. But too many people get stuck in the, let's make a strategy forever, but nothing actually happens. It's really easy to make a strategy. We can all make PowerPoints look good. Getting it done at a reasonable cost, that's the critical skill we need to have.
It's so good. It's so good because a lot of times doing it yourself as a leader, trimming the peripheral stuff that that would be nice to do, but are detracting from the speed of execution because it's letting people spend their straight energy on other projects that may not contribute.
And I agree. And it's also not fair. So I often talk about aligning incentives. So if I give you 15 priorities, your incentives are not going to be aligned because I'm sure 2 or 3 of them are going to get completed at some point, but you're going to pick the easy ones at the end of the day. If I say these are the 2 or 3 things you have to do, and they might be really hard, but once you get them done, I'm going to make sure the incentives are aligned, that you're going to be recognized for what you did. That means people grow faster, people are successful, and everybody wants to be successful. Everybody wants to be part of a winning team, and you change the whole dialogue. And then you get a flywheel going. And at the end, look, business is about creating a flywheel. It's about a flywheel to grow the business. It's as a team or an organization, a flywheel to get more done. And when I mean more, it's about more outcome, more value, not more things we do. The list doesn't have to be longer. You're going to drive the impact to the bottom line. That's what it's about.
Yeah, one of the clear messages today is just helping yourself and your team focus, and then finding ways to amp it up or speed it up and motivating them, recognizing them for the right things, and creating that alignment is so powerful. Now, on a different topic here, how does spending time on the front lines establish credibility with both board also and executives?
So if you think about when we talk with our boards, we talk about how do we grow the margin? How do we grow the revenue? How do we get certain things done? But we need to link that high level goal to actually making it happen. So I'll give you an example. I was in healthcare before working for a large provider system. And we were talking about why do we have relatively low patient payment and we get most of our money from insurance companies? And then we all debated this. And I sat in that room and I said at some point, well, when I was at a set of medical groups last week, and I actually went to the front desk and I sat down for half an hour just observing what they did. I said, and we made it really hard for patients to pay. So what if we put a solution in place that we make it easier to pay versus not pay? And they're like, well, we should do that. I'm like, but how would you do that? So I went to the whiteboard and I sketched it out. Why could I sketch it out? Well, A, because I've read about it, how some other companies did it. That's about compounding effective knowledge again. And then B, I spent the time in the front line, so I was able to give specific examples. So what I've learned, I now always spend, I would say between 10 and 20% of the time on the front line. And with the front line, I'm responsible for technology and digital. That's not where I spend time. I spend time in a medical group. So A, I'm really aligned with the key influencers within my business because they work within medical groups. B, some of them are shareholders. But C, I get that credibility with the board because they'll say, well, what if we do this? And literally you see the group turning their head towards me or, to our operations person and say, what would happen? Because we know how things work on the floor.
Such an important lesson for all of us to remember. It's so easy as we rise up in organizations to become an office and boardroom person and then forget everything else. I remember when I came out of college as an industrial engineer, and I thought I was going to do time studies and sort of plant layouts and sort of manage all these facilities that we were expanding in Latin America. But the very first thing that my boss did was send me to sewing machine school. So I learned how to sew sweatshirts and t-shirts for this athletic apparel company. And then he sent me to Latin America to a lot of the locations to sit on the manufacturing line. And we had team modular sewing. I did this all day. And my team that I was on had been doing this for years, and I was a newbie and I was terrible. He's like, I want you to feel the pressure of affecting the other people's pay in the group and have it aching back at the end of the day because of it. And oh my gosh, after a couple of weeks, because the engineers would come in and they would immediately start to look for ways to kind of basically cut people's pay, because they're like, well, you're not doing it efficiently. You should do this instead. And then to speed up. And he's like, no, no, no. Wait till you sit down there and you experience yourself. And that gave me so much more credibility at the end of the day because I could talk about it. And I love the way that it was easier for me because I was starting out. What you're saying goes even a step further because you're already a C-suite executive with the company and you're going down there and spending time on the front lines. What's the response you get from the people working on the front lines when you show up?
They're excited about it. So normally when I go to a location, I try to not go as part of an executive team or board visit. I go separately. I go on my own. And I'll talk and in general, the senior physicians or the leaders know I'm coming, but I'll talk to the front desk people. I'm like, I work here with the IT team. And I'll just sit down. And the first 10 minutes, they're a little bit careful because I come from corporate. But you talk to people and you build a relationship. And after 10, 15 minutes, they're hoping patience and they forget about you being there or being part of the leadership. And then you really learn. But then you do a few things. Number one, you learn about how the business really operates. Number two, we spot opportunities, which I wouldn't have seen if I would have done it for my spreadsheet or for my dashboard. But number three, next time we say, and we're like, what if we change this policy? What if we can change this product? Now I've got a bunch of people I can pick with a phone and say, hey, we said last week, what do you think would happen if I would do this? And they will give you pretty blunt feedback. I really believe it not only allows us to find more opportunities, it allows us to execute better. And lastly, I think for me, it's also a really fun way to be out there in the field and get that energy. I mean, I worked in veterinary diagnostics. I spend a lot of time in veterinary clinics, and it's really interesting even when you talk to the pet owners, because you will talk to them and like, hey, you're here, it's a wellness visit. And they're like, yeah, you're going to run a bunch of diagnostics and it's going to cost me $100 and then, I waste my money. And I would ask them, why do you waste your money? And they're like, well, they tell me that Fluffy is healthy. And I'm like, but what if Fluffy is not healthy? Now we can get ahead of the curve and cure him earlier. So me and others in the company spent time. And then we said, we should find a way to say, instead of saying Fluffy doesn't have a disease, we should say Fluffy doesn't have a disease, but 120 other dogs in this zip code and the 3 zip codes around it did have a disease. So now instead of a disappointment, you've wasted your money, you found value. It's all about how do you create value in the eye of the people who pay.
Wow. So using the data that your clinic's gathering and saying, hey, look, your breed of dog in this area for whatever environmental reasons, or they get it from other dogs, they can get sick, with this. And you're providing this information to the customers in that moment. Wow.
And these specifically were tick-borne diseases. But the key is it's about how do you find the value? And at the end, the value has to be there for the person who pays, because if not, they will not come back. So, but I would have never understood that if I wouldn't have just hung out in the waiting room and talked to customers. So what was the last time you went into the field? Or secondly, I would say, when your CEO says, oh, we got to meet with this important customer, are they going to say, well, Edward, you're in charge of IT and digital, but can you go talk to that customer because you get it? Versus it's always her or him going to go out there. I think that is critical as an executive to establish that credibility by being out there in the field.
Yeah, and just to put a little bit of a different slant on it, not just any executive, right? You're the CIO, so you're bringing this IT deal. So it seems like it'll be really easy for you to stay in the office on that front. Like I've got IT related, I got cybersecurity, all this other stuff. But you are spending time in the field and you are getting that broader view of the business. And that's going to make you, more powerful and have more insights because you're getting that cross-functional exposure on the front lines.
Absolutely. Look, any good CIO is a business executive who has a technology portfolio. They're not technology leaders because at the end of the day, that's not what a long-term value is. And that's why we have really good directors and VPs who report to us. They will run their functional areas. My role is to get the right people in the right seat, connected to the business objectives, and then speed it up, deliver quicker. That's my role. And then the other part of my role is work with my board, work with my executive teams, with my shareholders, to make sure that we keep growing the business the right way. And often technology is a lever, but sometimes the answer is we should not use technology. We should find another way to solve this. It's about finding the right levers to pull to grow the business.
Let's talk about your background a little bit. You're from the Netherlands, and here you are, an executive at a U.S.-based company. What was your road to get here?
So in Europe, I worked for a number of American companies, and I ended up running first the technology operations for Europe, and then I also ran Asia and Australia. So I was really, I would say, well-rounded international executive. And at some point, the next career step for me, logically, was to move to the US to run it at corporate. So the company I worked for, IDEX, a great company, moved me over to the US, and I ran IT for their laboratories worldwide. And then eventually ended up in a marketing role. It was a great trajectory. And look, this is a great country. I enjoy living here. And look, my kids grow up here. I'll live here for the rest of my life. But it's a great place to be here. Business climate. Nothing's perfect, but it's really a pleasure to work and live here.
All right. What do American leaders, people that don't have that international flavor like you did experience, what can they learn from international leaders or specifically business leaders from the Netherlands?
I would say two things. I think number one is if you worked international enough, you become really good at quickly learning the dynamics, the interpersonal dynamics of a specific industry or a specific location. So in a previous role, I would be 1 week in Japan driving change, the next week in Germany, and then the week after I would meet with my management team in the US. And in every culture, you have to approach things differently. So if you're in Japan, you need the top leader to agree, but then to really drive the change, you need that most senior middle manager who really has a lot of technical knowledge to accept and embrace the change. If you go in Germany, it's relatively easy. It's hierarchy. Go to the most senior, lady or woman or man, and just get them to buy in, and it will happen. And the US is also a little bit more, I would say, where the more senior person drives the decision. So it's about understanding that landscape and then driving it. And secondly, look, Dutch people are known for their directness, and I had to tone it down a little bit. Because in the Netherlands, you would say, how are you today? They would say, I'm terrible. You're like, no, you're supposed to say, I'm doing good. Move on. So that directness.
We're like, wait a minute. This is not the Netherlands. This is how we do it.
But sometimes being open and honest and transparent is really good too, because that means your team knows where it is. They're not going to go hunting for the answers because they know I've told them the reality, and then let's go deal with it. And sometimes we're trying to be too nice and too polite. But at the end, I want my team to know how it really is so they can react to reality instead of to, the polite version of how I like it to be. Because we can't manage to that.
Very, very good. The word that comes to mind for me is just having such a great awareness. And when you maybe make a few mistakes on the international level, you realize I've got to change my approach. I've got to meet the team where they are and their culture and their environment to run it the most effectively.
Absolutely. And a different way of looking at things is not wrong. So I can either go in and try to, push them to use my way of thinking. But what if I go in with my curiosity and say, I want to end up at this goal, but I don't care that much how we get there. Within reason, it's going to be legal and ethical. So why don't I work with them to find the path to get to the goal we want to get to together? And I call this kind of the judo strategy. So instead of saying we're going to push it through, I'm going to try to take energy from the other group who's there and then kind of direct them into the direction I believe we should go. And once you get that right, it's really powerful. And also having that extra layer of complexity of, different cultures, to me, makes work more exciting. It makes work more fun. Because if it's too simple, we wouldn't do what we do. Let's be honest.
So true. Well, on a different note, you're obviously leading the charge at an organization that's really focused on improving women's healthcare. What's it like being in such a field where you're impacting so many people, especially at different, some of these times could be really working with people in the most difficult times of their life, and here you are, as an executive, in that world.
Well, I'm incredibly lucky that I get to lead part of the organization. I mean, we deliver close to 1% of the babies in the US, which is pretty astonishing. And, we're also, we are working with different organizations. We just started a partnership with Kayaba Care to make sure that we help, I would say, underserved groups as well in the population with their maternal needs. It's beautiful to help to drive to better outcomes and to use data and technology so our physicians and our clinical staff can really focus on the patient, and we'll take care of the rest in the back end. It's beautiful that every time we make a difference, we can impact a life, or if we're lucky, 2 lives. It gives a little bit more to the mission versus, I think Steve Jobs said it when he was trying to recruit a CEO for Apple back then. He said to John Scully, do you want to sell sugar water forever, or do you want to make a difference? You know what? My teams make a difference in the health of women and in the health of their babies every day. And it's pretty cool to
fill out. I can tell. I can see in your face that how meaningful it is. No, Larry, every time I've got a CIO on, or really any executive on these days, I got to bring up artificial intelligence. You brought up the cool tick example whenever you were working in the veterinarian world, and you were able to say, what matters. Well, use that data to determine, healthcare outcomes, hopefully for animals. How do you see AI impacting your business?
I think we're still early on with really applied examples. I think over the coming year, what we'll see AI being used for low risk activities. Simple things like sorting faxes to the right place and things like that. There's still a lot of manual work in healthcare. I would hope over the longer term, and I think it will, is that we go towards what I would call guided intelligence. So we have really good clinicians, doctors, and I don't see anything quickly replacing the work they do, because they have the relationship with the patient. And in our case, they touch the stomach of our patient. They make sure that the baby is in the right position. You're not going to replace that quickly. What we can do is say, well, based on the background and effects of this patient compared to the large data set we have, because we will have the largest data set of women's health in the US or probably globally, I would suggest you also check postpartum depression or other things based on the characteristics of this patient. So we will start suggestions like that to our physicians.
Like a prompt.
Our physicians will have the clinical autonomy to make the right decision. Because at the end, we're not at a level yet where we can replace that with technology. And I think especially when it comes to pregnancies, I struggle to see how you get there, because the human relationship does add value there. We have amazing doctors, and the best part of my job is to read a lot of the testimonials. We look at that and we look at the patient reviews. It's pretty cool. Yeah. And when you walk into our care centers, there's a wall of baby cards. So most of the time when, we deliver a baby, they'll send us a card. It's really cool. So I have a tendency to take pictures of me standing in front of these baby cards, which is super cool. Because at the end, that's what we do every day as a team.
Yeah, that's going to be a great motivator too, right? To create alignment. And you got someone at a computer maybe doing coding or analyzing data. And then just to have a card like that to remind you of, hey, we're doing all this for one reason. Well, multiple reasons, but the end state is a healthy kiddo or a healthy mother.
Absolutely. And as an organization, we look at dashboards, we track our outcomes, and we see consistently that we're tracking all the right clinical outcomes and that we deliver better results than other hospitals or medical groups. And to us, that's the driver of what we do. It's pretty cool to see.
Now, you said you're going to be have the largest data collection of, what was it?
Well, if you think about women's health, so we are getting close to being on a unified platform.
Okay.
And so if you think about it, we will have, I would say, the most OBGYN physicians on a single platform. So that means we have the largest data set.
Yeah.
And we obviously only use this internally, but if we can use it to more specific, say, for this subset of patients, we should really check, for certain conditions. They'll be so powerful. And that means that our technology gives another lever to our physicians to improve the care. And that's what we're all about.
Yeah, I love that. because physicians are people too. And if you can make their job easier and help them focus on the more critical things, then overall the outcome should be better, and help them reduce the workload on the more menial task. I mean, that's going to be huge.
Well, and that's a large part too. Like if the more clicks I can take away, every time the doctor doesn't have to click, but they can actually look the patient in the face, that makes a whole difference. Because at the end, that relationship is incredibly valuable. So our team is really there trying to optimize the systems we have so we make their life easier. And the way we say this is, look, we take care of our clinics, our care centers, so they can take care of the patients. That's what this whole game. It's all about the patients. And we all have a role to play in the team. Just like in a football team, we all play a role.
Eduard, what's your parting thought for our listeners today?
I think the parting thought is, get your organization right, get the right people in the right place, pick the right goals, and then drive. And make sure you don't drive for 2-3 years effort, drive for 3 to 6 months effort, and then just string them together. Execute relentlessly, and then keep learning so you can execute the right things.
Woo, great playbook. Eduard, thank you for coming on today, sir.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.